Welcome to the next installment in my video lecture series in economics. And in this particular video lecture, I'm going to be taking a look at deadweight loss. And this is an important concept because it's a measure of efficiency. We're going to be taking a look at efficiency and how the market equilibrium is the most efficient and how any underproduction relative to the equilibrium amount or overproduction relative to the equilibrium amount leads to producer and consumer surplus that is less compared to the equilibrium output level. As always, I like to give appropriate attribution to any information that I use, and this is the textbook that any information that is in quotes in this video is from. And we like to start off with defining terms to make sure everybody's comfortable with the terms that are being used in this particular video. And the term deadweight loss refers to the total loss of producer and consumer surplus from underproduction or overproduction. And remember, that is relative to the equilibrium level of production in a particular market. So if you realize and you remember from a previous video lecture, we showed what consumer surplus and producer surplus is. And if you allow a market, and if it's in equilibrium, the equilibrium price and quantity occur where supply and demand are equal to one another, and the area of consumer surplus is the area above the equilibrium price but below the demand curve, and the producer surplus is the area below the equilibrium price but above the supply curve. So what I want you to pay particular attention to is how this area changes if we have underproduction or overproduction relative to the equilibrium output level. So for underproduction, we could just pick any level of output that is less than the equilibrium amount, here denoted by Q sub E. So we can put in an amount, and that is Q under, so that is less than the equilibrium amount. And if you go straight up, if you're doing a graphical analysis, you continue upwards until you hit the demand curve. And you'll notice, in particular, you should pay attention to this triangle here and this triangle here, because that's the important part of the analysis. The thing that you need to realize is that when we have underproduction relative to the equilibrium, that is output that is not being produced and it is not being consumed. So this is output that, for example, if we allowed this market to be in equilibrium, the difference between QE and Q under is output that is not being produced and is not being consumed. So if it's not being consumed, it does not generate consumer surplus. So as shown here, that shaded area, the top triangle, is the deadweight loss that used to be consumer surplus. All right, so that's output that is not being consumed and therefore is no longer generating consumer surplus. The triangle in the bottom is also deadweight loss, but it is deadweight loss that used to be producer surplus. So this is output that used to occur at the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity, and because of underproduction relative to the equilibrium output level, since it's not being produced and it's not being sold, it is not generating producer surplus either. So make sure you realize that originally this region here that is delineated by the demand curve and the supply curve, that entire region used to be total surplus. These two triangles here are denoting the loss of consumer surplus and the loss of producer surplus that is occurring because of the underproduction relative to the equilibrium output level in this particular market. We can also take a look at the deadweight loss of overproduction, producing more relative to the equilibrium output level. So we can put in an amount here, Q over, which is greater than the equilibrium amount, and the triangle that's created by the supply curve and the demand curve, and the dotted line representing the quantity that is overproduction relative to the equilibrium amount, that is deadweight loss. And it's deadweight loss because individuals are producing items and incurring costs from them, but they are, that price or the cost associated with producing that output is greater than the highest price people are willing to pay. So there's a difference between the cost of producing that item and what demanders value that item at. And because of this overproduction, this is the deadweight loss that occurs. So here would be the total surplus, but we would have to subtract off that deadweight loss due to overproduction. So hopefully this is helpful to you. Anytime you're looking at a market and trying to analyze what the total surplus is and measure the efficiency, the concepts of consumer and producer surplus and deadweight loss are what economists use to measure the efficiency of the market or to measure any public policy initiatives that impact that particular market.